Hey guys, good morning. Hope you're doing well. I'm Timmy Riggs, and I'll just jump right into it. First of all, really wish I was with you guys today. I am excited about the next 5 weeks after today, but I'm sorry that my schedule couldn't get rearranged for me to be there in person, and so I'm sad that I can't meet you, but I'm excited to meet you next week. This class is about freedom, the journey to freedom, and there's all types of things we might need freedom from. Maybe it's from our finances, or maybe it's even how we handle relationships or our attitudes, whatever. There's a whole lot of things, right? Even in our spiritual life, feeling free. So that's what we're going to talk about over the next 6 weeks. So for me to really get a gauge on this class and for it to not just be a monologue each week, right? I want this to be a dialogue, us talking, you guys asking questions, me asking questions, things like that. I ask that you fill this out today. So I have an individual question sheet going around, hoping the facilitator's handing that out or is about to. And there's a few questions on there that if you help answer honestly, it's going to help us throughout the journey of the next few weeks. And really, I'll be able to come in next week, kind of have a temperature, know where you guys are at. Here's the key. Answer completely honest. You have the freedom. Don't feel like you have to answer the way I want you to answer. That won't help us actually become more free. You have to answer honestly. So the very first question, for example, is from a belief standpoint, what is your relationship with God? Do you believe Jesus is God? If the answer is yes, say yes. That's great. If it's no, say no. That's okay, because it's going to help us as we move forward. So go ahead, pause the video, and this is completely anonymous. No need for you to put your name on it, but this is something the facilitator will collect and I will pick up before next week. And go ahead right now, pause it, answer these questions, and then when it looks like everyone's done, go ahead and start the video again. Okay, so my name's Timmy Riggs. Like I said, I'm the college pastor at Bethany First Church. It's a church right next to SNU on 39th Street. So if you've ever seen it, kind of now you know where I work. And I actually grew up in Florida. I was a pastor's kid, and I grew up in Florida. Loved it there. I'm definitely a beach person. I love the beach. I love the mountains too. Neither of those are here, but loved Florida and loved being a pastor's kid. And in fact, at one point, I did spend some time by mountains. After I got married and graduated college, my wife and I lived in Arizona, and I was a youth pastor and young adult pastor there for a little while before we came back here to Oklahoma City. I love what I get to do, but the journey looked different all along the way. A lot like most of our journeys look. As a kid growing up, I just always wanted to be great and do great things. And for a while, I didn't know, like, is this selfish or is this a weird thought or whatever? Like, do I have the freedom to want to be great? But I actually didn't really know what it was going to be. And towards the end of my high school career, I started feeling like, okay, maybe God's calling me to be a pastor too. For a long time, I fought it, because I was like, no, that's just because that's what my dad does and other people are telling me to do it. But eventually, as I graduated high school, I was like, okay, I think this is what I'm going to do. So I came to Southern Nazarene University, this center of Oklahoma, right? I really didn't know much about Oklahoma. In fact, I had never been here until I got here for college, and I enrolled in the ministry program at SNU to be a pastor, but I also played football, okay? And so all of those things, I'm like, I want to be great. I want to be a great football player. I want to be a great pastor and preacher, and I want to get good grades. I had this mindset of, hey, this is what I'm going to do. Well, I got to school, and that all kind of changed quick, okay? I had this desire and this idea of who I wanted to become and who I wanted to be. But then my actions quickly didn't line up with that. So at football practice for 2 days, when I first got to college, it went like this. I got there, and in my mind, I figured it would kind of be like high school, just a little bit better, okay? So in high school, I was pretty fast, and in Florida, that's kind of the thing, like speed, right? So I didn't get hit a lot because I could avoid the hits. And I hated getting hit, so I would run as hard and as fast as I could to get away from the hits. So the big guys in high school were usually pretty slow, so I could get away from them. I got to college, and I realized that the guys in college, they're fast and they're big. So there wasn't a lot of dodging and avoiding them, right? Like even someone's like, man, you guys are eating something extra in your Wheaties, right? Like you guys are huge and you're really fast. So I was like, how can I avoid getting hit? Well, the guys that get hit are the guys that play. And the guys that play practice a lot. So maybe if I get really mediocre and average, right, kind of giving half effort as much as possible, then I won't play on Saturdays, which is perfect because then I won't practice that much. I'll just kind of sit on the sidelines at practice, crack jokes, maybe boost morale, but really I'll just kind of fit into this mediocre role. And that's exactly what I did. I did it so well that I never played a down of college football. And I was able to avoid some hits even in practice, okay? Well, that bled over into other areas of my life. So in my spiritual life and in my schoolwork, I was spending no time with God. I wasn't connecting with Him. I wasn't getting in the Word. I wasn't praying. And I wasn't growing there. I wasn't becoming any more like Jesus. And then in my studies, in my ministry program, I remember going one day, and one of my classes was at 8 a.m., and one of the students was like, "Oh man, this morning was fantastic. I went on a prayer walk, and the birds were chirping, and the deers were singing. I woke up at 6, by the way, and then I had breakfast with Jesus. It was fantastic. And now I'm here. What about you, Tim? You look terrible." And I was like, "Yeah, it's 8:11. I woke up 30 seconds ago and sprinted over here. None of that happened in my life," right? So I was getting mediocre there. Then to cap it all off, I had this secret goal, this secret dream that I think God's calling me to be a pastor. I think He's calling me to speak and to do really cool, big things. I just think that's what God's calling me to do. And it has to do with communicating. But in my speech class, my freshman year of college, I was told I had to give a 30-second speech on Legos. Legos, the things you connect, right? 30 seconds. That's it. I can make that up right now. And there was only 12 people in the class. 8 of them were my friends. I get up there to give my speech. I look out. I see my friends. They don't care, right? They're texting. They're not listening to me. They don't, it doesn't matter, right? I get up there. My hands are shaking so bad that I grab the podium. I have shaky hands to begin with, but then I'm shaking like this. I grab the podium and I go to speak, and I'm like, I can't speak because I'm so nervous and I'm so scared. And finally that comes out. I'm like, man, I'm just so nervous. And my professor's sitting in the back, and she doesn't care either. She's reading a magazine, and she's like, "It's okay, honey, just take a breath. It'll get easier," right? Reading in the back, her feet propped up. And I walk out of there kind of head down a little bit because I'm like, man, I have this desire to be great, but the thing I want to be great at, I can't even do for a room of 12 people about a subject that I know really easily, and it was only 30 seconds long. I believe that a lot of what was going on was that some of my decisions to kind of be average and mediocre bled into other areas of my life. John Maxwell, he's a leadership kind of guru, has a lot of books, and one of the things he says is everything worthwhile, everything great is uphill. But everything that we do is often out of downhill habits. So everything worthwhile is uphill, yet we live with downhill habits. And so I was like, that's exactly what happened to me. And eventually I began to realize that. And thanks to SNU, they actually got me into a class that if I just breathed, I got an A, and it kind of helped me prepare and plan for ways to be better and to grow. And not so much worry on the destination, but to become better on the journey. That's what it helped me do. It helped me spot who do I want to become and what are the tools that can get me there. I think a lot of us might have things in us where we're like, I want to do this, or I want to be great. I feel like God's even calling me to do this or that, but how am I ever going to get there? How am I going to have the money to pay for it? How am I going to have the time to do it? How am I going to have the patience? How am I, right? It's easy to be like, well, how the heck am I going to become that or this? This guy named David in the Bible, you might know him. He's famous for David and Goliath. He's the guy, the teenager who beat Goliath. His life is amazing, and at one point he becomes king of Israel, and he leads really, really well. But before that, he was just a teenage shepherd. In fact, I'll tell you the story. King Saul, he was the first king of Israel. He's not doing great. God picked him, and he's not following the way that he's supposed to be king. He's not loving. He's not kind. He's not generous, right? God has a plan, and Saul's not living into it. And so he says, I'm done with Saul, and he picks this guy Samuel, basically, to go pick the new king. And he tells Samuel, go to this guy Jesse. And this is all in 1 Samuel 16. I'd encourage you to maybe look at it or look it up on Google, right? And he says, hey, Jesse, Samuel goes to Jesse and he says, you have 8 boys, right? Like, show me your boys because one of them's supposed to be king. Jesse goes through and he shows him 7. And they're all strong and good looking and hardworking. And Samuel's like, hey, none of these are them. Like, don't you have one more? And Jesse just goes, yeah, I guess. Like, he's out in the fields. He's with the shepherds. He's just a shepherd boy. And Samuel's like, well, call him in. And all of a sudden, as David runs in, God tells Samuel, this is the one. I look at the heart. Man looks at the outer exterior. Samuel anoints him as king. And I'm like, sweet. The next line's going to say, David marched into the kingdom, took over, put his feet up on the palace, took charge. He had all his sheep with him, and he was king. But that's not how it happened. In fact, David gets told that he's going to be king, right? So a little bit of a head start. Some of us are like, oh, God, tell me what you want me to do. David does. He gets told what he's supposed to be. But then he has to go right back out to the pasture. So when he's out there, I've got to be thinking that he's like, man, how am I going to get to the palace from the pasture? How am I going to get to the promise? How am I going to become what I was told I can become? We've had that feeling, right? How can I be what I feel like I'm supposed to be? It seems so far out of reach. Here's some secrets. Well, not even secrets, but here's some keys, I think, to David's success in life. Because he does. He becomes king eventually. So how? Well, one of the things is David goes right back out to be a shepherd. And we know this. He did the job well. He didn't complain and cry and say, man, I was supposed to be this, and man, I can't believe I'm not a king yet. No, he started being a really good shepherd, or probably continued to be. He says later on that, hey, when a lion or a bear came to eat my sheep and steal it, I ran after it. I killed the lion or the bear. I took my sheep back. That's what David said. That's the kind of shepherd he was. He cared so much about a single sheep that he'd risk his life to fight a lion or a bear. That's how he led them. Good, strong, with love, right? With compassion. Like, to go after your one little sheep, I'd be like, peace out, sheep. Like, good luck. He was like, no, I'm coming after you. Shows us the type of character that David had. But ultimately, it shows us that even with this nagging feeling that he can do more, be more, is called to more, he focuses on what's right in front of him. David says, hey, yes, this is what I want to be and hope to be, but right now, this is what's in front of me. I can be a good parent. I can be a good coworker. I can be disciplined with the finances that I have now, instead of just, wow, I just wish I had more and then we live in that state forever. No, David says, let's focus on what's right in front of us and do what we can. While that's happening, David actually was pretty good at playing the harp. And so he probably played the harp a lot when he's sitting under the trees, right, and waiting. But he probably didn't know that what happens next was going to happen. When the Spirit of God descends on David and he gets anointed king and goes back into being a shepherd, the Spirit of God actually left Saul. And Saul says he gets tired. The Bible says that Saul gets tired and sad, and he's like, hey, servants, find me somebody that can play music because I'm sad. Make it better, right? Make it stop. And this part's so cool. It's like when you watch a movie and it does the credits at the end and it says, hey, this is taxi driver number 1 or store clerk number 2. That's like this part. This person is unnamed. And all it is a servant that says, oh, Saul, I know a guy who can play the harp. Yeah, he's pretty good. It's just servant number 1. Bible never names him. Okay? I'm like, does David even know this guy exists? Is this someone who just happens to be walking down the path every day to the castle to be a servant and hears David playing the harp and asks one of his buddies, you know that guy? And the guy's like, oh yeah, that's David. Like, is something going on here? Is God doing something that David had no idea was going to happen? I believe so. Because they go get David and they bring him to the castle and David serves King Saul, plays the harp for him. But we know that he does it really well. He focuses on what's right in front of him. And again, at one point, he might just be like, man, I thought I was supposed to be king here, and I'm serving the king? Are you kidding me? I'm just here to play a little instrument? Like, could have seemed really insignificant. Yet David gives it his full attention and full effort. King Saul writes to Jesse and says, hey, your son is awesome. I want to keep him. And he does, and he continues to promote David And at one point, he becomes Saul's arm bearer. That means when they went to war, he carried King Saul's weapons. Not only that, when King Saul was fighting somebody and wounded them, he wouldn't waste his time to finish the job. He'd keep moving forward. And if the enemy soldier was just wounded, David was the one responsible for killing the enemy soldier and finishing the job. I know that sounds graphic, but the deeper meaning, I think, is ultimately that we can see that David focused on what was right in front of him, did it really well, and he finished. He finished the job at hand. I have been an excellent starter my whole life, but sometimes not very good at finishing. But I think one of the things that sets great people apart is that they finish. They focus on what's at hand, and they finish that job, and they do it really well, even if they don't want to. But ultimately, all those things have something in common, and it's really what eventually led him to even fight Goliath. See, on the day that he went down there and fought Goliath, it was the Israelite army against the Philistine army. And David and his whole family was fighting for the Israelites. Well, but David was just working in the palace, right? He wasn't expected to fight in the war. He's just a teenage boy. But Jesse, his dad, says, hey, your brothers are there. They're hungry. Go take them food. Maybe serve some other people some food. So David literally ends up at the battle just as a waiter, a delivery boy. And he takes food and he serves it to him, and he ends up beating Goliath. But again, the focus for me right here is not so much that he beat Goliath. The focus is how he got there, by serving. Every step of the way, David served. He served his sheep. He serves King Saul as a harp player. He serves King Saul as an arm bearer. And he served really a lot of the Israelite army as a waiter. But then he served his entire nation as a warrior when he beat Goliath. And I don't think that was in his plans. I don't think he expected, okay, I'm going to start here as a shepherd and God's going to do all this crazy stuff to be king. He just focused on what was right in front of him. I'll wrap this up with a story real quick. One of my best friends, his name is Casey, and he's a pastor here with me. And he one time was an intern before he got hired to be a pastor. And Pastor Chris, he was the youth pastor, and he's actually now our boss and executive pastor here, but he was the youth pastor, and he sat Casey down towards the end of his internship and said, hey, Casey, we want to offer you a job, and here's why. Yeah, you have great theology, you're a good communicator, you're great with the kids, but one of the things that stuck out was the way that you serve. See, in the youth room, there was this stage, and underneath it, there was all these balls that could get collected underneath it. And sometimes there would be 35, 40 balls. All of them would be under there before they got them out because no one really wanted the job. It was full of cobwebs and dirty, right? And Chris says, the day that changed that I knew I wanted to hire you was when I walked around the corner and I saw your long dangling legs underneath the stage when nobody asked you to, nobody told you to, and in fact, you didn't even know anybody was in the room. And you were just getting all the balls one by one. He was like, that's when I knew you were somebody I wanted on my team because you serve even when nobody saw it coming. That's how we become great. We serve. I truly believe it. I think we look outside of ourselves and we don't think so much of, man, I'm stuck in a rut. I'm never going to be there. No, I think we get to work early and we look for opportunities to serve our boss, to serve our coworkers. I know it can sound maybe simple and cliche, but when we build a life doing these things consistently, it creates a legacy. It creates a lifestyle that says, hey, I'm someone that steps up to the plate. I do hard things. I help others. I think a really small example is maybe even you go in, you get the last bit of coffee from the coffee pot in the break room, and you have the freedom to put it back, right? But instead you say, you know what, I don't want someone to come in here and have to make a new pot, so I'm going to make the new pot. Right there, huge difference. I'm going to take 30 seconds to refill it and press start so the coffee can be there hot and fresh for the next person that comes in. Those types of things are what help us become great in serving in that way. So you can pause in just a second because I have a few questions that I want you guys to go through. And you have the sheets in front of you. And the facilitator can pause the video. And question 3 and 4, I want you to handle at your table. But the other ones can be just for you. In fact, the first question is, do you want to be great? And I already put the answer in there for you. Yes. The answer is yes. I want you to be great. I want you to have that desire. I think you do too. And the second question, I want you to write it in, but it's ultimately, how can you be great? Well, serve. Begin to serve. We can all serve everyone, right? And then 3 and 4, fill these out, talk at your table about them. But question 5, just for you, okay? I want you to fill this out. Begin to dream. Give yourself the freedom to do this. So right now, go ahead, pause me, talk about these at your table, the ones that I want you to, and then we'll get to the next part of the video. So kind of that first part was about this idea of, hey, what do you want? Ultimately, we want to be great. And I hope that that's your desire, that you want to be great. And we can be great by serving. And I think that sometimes we are kept from being great because of limitations, because of things that get in our way, and maybe even limitations we don't know about. But I love this quote, and I don't remember who said it, but if we fight for our limitations, kind of saying, man, I'm not good at that, I'm terrible at remembering names. I mean, a lot of people say that, right? I've said that before. Or, man, I'm just not very good at remembering things. If we fight for those limitations, the quote says, we get to keep them. And I was like, man, that really made an impact on my life, because I think that's true. I think if we constantly tell ourselves we're not good at this, or don't even think that we can try something, then of course we're not going to ever get better at it. If I tell myself that I'm nervous to talk to people I don't know, then I'm never going to talk to people I don't know. But if I have a desire to be friendly and to create new relationships, well, then I should probably get better at figuring out how to talk to people I don't know, right? And so I don't want to tell myself that that's what I'm not good at. Well, limitations and keeping them and fighting for them is something that people have done forever. And a lot of times, God chooses people to use that are really pretty stuck on fighting for their limitations. And Moses is a perfect example of that. Maybe you've heard of Moses. He was born to the Israelites while his family was enslaved to the Egyptians. So remember, we talked about King David, who was actually after the Israelites were freed from Egypt. And so we're kind of backtracking here and talking about when the Israelites were slaves in Egypt. Moses was born, but there were too many Israelite boys being born, and the Pharaoh of Egypt was nervous that they might overtake him. So when Moses was born, he had all the Israelite boy babies murdered. He sent them out his soldiers out to kill them. And Moses' mom ended up putting Moses in a little basket, floating him down the river, and Pharaoh's daughter is the one that found him. And so it's just ironic, right? Pharaoh actually ends up raising Moses almost as his own son. As Moses grows older, there's something in him, and somehow he kind of knew, like, hey, these are my people, and this scuffle happens between an Israelite and an Egyptian, and obviously an Israelite was a slave to the Egyptian, and Moses kills the Egyptian, okay? And the next day, everything hits the fan. And so Moses gets out of there and runs away to the wilderness, and he's there for 40 years, it says. Kind of created a new life, new family, and he's away from the big inner city of Egypt. And all of a sudden, God comes to him through a burning bush. So maybe this is sparking a memory of who Moses is, right? God comes to him in a burning bush, speaks to him, and is like, hey, I'm going to use you to help free the Israelites. I want to use you to get my people out of there. I want to use you, Moses. There's greatness in you. And because of what I am going to give you and instill in you. And what unfolds after that is crazy. And yet, I think it's something that we all do all the time. And Moses begins to make excuses on why God shouldn't use him. One of them really stands out is that Moses has a speech impediment. And so he's like, hey, God, I've never been good at talking, and I don't think you really want to use me because I'm going to sound funny. They're not going to want to listen. Why should they care? And God's like, dude, I picked you for a reason. I picked you to show that even someone like you with a speech impediment can go on and be an incredible communicator, right? God is always doing that stuff. Like, usually God wants to use our weaknesses to make us great. And Moses just is not getting that. And in fact, 6 times he tells God, hey, I really don't think you should be me. I think you should pick somebody else. And literally, the last time he says, I don't want to do it. Pick somebody else. But God gets his way because he's God. And Moses ends up doing it. But really, he's constantly, for so long, was fighting for his limitations. But it wasn't just him. When he goes to the Israelites, God says, tell them this. Tell them, I've heard their cry, that I care about them, that I want to free them, that I will fight for them, that they will win. Like, I'll be on that coach's team, right? Like, tell me all that, and I'll be like, yeah, sign me up. Like, you don't have to pay me. I'll play for you. Like, you sound awesome, right? And Moses goes, tells the Israelite leaders that, and they couldn't care less. In fact, they silenced Moses. They didn't really listen. They didn't care. And they're doing the same thing Moses did. They're fighting for their limitations. They're deciding to stay in slavery instead of be like, yeah, I choose freedom, because they're scared, which makes sense. Anytime we have a good opportunity or to do something new or something that maybe stretches us, we're a little frightened. But that's how we move through and get through it. And we don't just focus on our limitations. We focus on what we're able to do and how we can actually do it. And when we believe in God and trust that he's there for us, that's a huge game changer. It was for Moses. Once he said yes, God did use Moses, raised him up, led them out, and of course eventually got the Israelites out of Egypt as slaves. But for a long time, they wanted to fight for their slavery. It reminds me of Harriet Tubman, and I was studying her, and she's interviewed, and in one of her quotes she says, you know, I saved thousands, but I could have saved thousands more if only I could have convinced them that they were slaves. I was like, wow, like that blew my mind. Like so many times we are caught in bondage, in slavery, in our limitations, and really don't think that there's any way out. It's absolute slavery, where we're not even mindful that we're in it. We're ignorant of where we are. Harriet Tubman, of course, was at one point an African-American slave who didn't know she was a slave. She said this, and eventually escapes, gets up north, is free, but decides, hey, my freedom is so valuable that I can't just keep it to myself. I want everybody else to experience this freedom. She goes back and is a part of the Underground Railroad, where she saves so many slaves and pulls them out of freedom. But she had to risk her freedom to lead them to freedom. So fighting our limitations, yes, can seem scary, but so many wonderful, great things can happen in the process. We can help free other people. We can go to new heights and do things that we never expected that we could do. I love the passages of the Bible where it talks about the idea of, man, God loves us so much. He has a plan for us. He has a future for us. Like he knows the hairs on our head. Not just that he counted them, but he knows the number of them. Like there's so many scriptures that talks about we don't have to worry about tomorrow because God's going to take care of today and right now. And when we're able to see that and have that perspective, it's a lot easier to step out of our limitations and the thing that are keeping us slave and in bondage. And I think that to really become great and to serve and to live a life of freedom, we have to begin to take off the limitations. We have to leave behind the things that are holding us back. Maybe it's just a negative attitude or gossip, constantly talking about other people. Maybe it's terrible financial decisions, constantly spending money that we don't have and not creating any type of savings account. Maybe it's just the way that we treat people at the office or in the factory or whatever it might be. There's so many things that are limiting us, and we might not be aware of it. So right now, I'll have the facilitator pause the video again, and I want you to go through and write down, okay, what are 3 limitations? And maybe you never really think about it, so you might really have to dig deep. Take some time. This is the time, right? This is the time. So go through and think, what are 3 limitations that maybe you're keeping me from living a life of freedom, from being great, from serving people? Maybe it's just the limitation of that when you go home, you don't really do anything. You're not involved with your family. You're very passive. You just sit on the couch and wait for the next day to come. Well, like I said last time, when we do that, a long day can become a long week, a long month, a long year. And then we're just like, oh, life just had its way with us. And so we want to be intentional about our days. So right now, pause it, talk about 3 things that are limiting. And then after that, I want you to talk to your table about things that are limiting. You don't have to say yours, especially if they're private. You can kind of make up, be like, hey, I know a buddy who deals with this, right? But talk about some things that keep us limited from living a life of freedom and a life that is big and fun and adventurous, and ultimately a life that God is calling us to. Hey, closing statements is I'm excited about the next 5 weeks. And here's just the last bit of a reminder. You are great, you can be great, and Jesus tells us the best way for us to be great is to be a servant to all. One day him and his disciples were walking, and his disciples, they were just like you and I, and they were arguing about who's going to be the greatest when God's kingdom really begins to take over. And Jesus turns around and he says, hey, in my kingdom it's different. You don't rule with anger and a temper and by authority. You rule through love. And the best way to love is to be a servant to all people. And so one of the ways that we begin to live a life more free is we don't think about what other people owe us or what we expect from them. We choose to live out of service. I'm going to be someone who serves today, tomorrow, for the rest of my life. And I'm going to start with my family, with my friends, with my kids, with my coworkers, right where I'm at. So before next week, let's look for ways to serve. I'm excited to meet you all, and hopefully there's something you can walk away with that's practical, and we'll go from there. All right, have a good week.